To the Black girl who is living and healing from a father wound, I see you. Welcome to the Black Girl Seen podcast, where we discuss all things feeling seen, known, and loved. I'm your host, Kaylin Wilson, a licensed clinical social worker and therapist here in Atlanta, Georgia. I hope you're enjoying the podcast this month. We are talking about feeling seen this summer, and we're talking about it from the space of deservingness. So if you're listening to it today, it's Father's Day, and I see you for those of us who maybe hold some challenging and painful emotions today. Like last month, I did a couple of episodes around mothering. I didn't do as many around fathering because I wanted to, well, also there were just less Sundays in the month, but I wanted to make sure that we talked about all these different pieces about feeling seen going into our summer. And so today we're going to dive in a little similarly the way we did last month to talk about what it's like to maybe experience, live with, and heal from a father wound. So what is a father wound? It's an emotional and relational injury that can come from your experiences that you either did or didn't have with your father or father and paternal figures in your life growing up. This is also a heavy topic for today. So for those of us who maybe lost our fathers, for those of us who maybe have really safe, comfortable, peaceful, enjoyable relationships with our fathers, this episode might not be for you. It might be hard to connect with what I'm sharing, especially if you're navigating grief around this holiday. And so I'm going to share some resources for you that I'm going to add to the show notes that you can dive into today to support you in your comfort, support you in getting through this day the best way you know how, or in celebrating this day with the father you love. Now, for those of us who maybe have difficult or challenging relationships with our fathers, even if they have left this earth and passed on from this timeline, I do think this could be helpful for you today, and I am sharing these thoughts for you. Now, this isn't about bashing dads the same way the last episode wasn't about bashing moms or blaming everything on your parents. It's about acknowledging the scars that were left behind. And so I really hope that you can, take care of yourself as you listen to this. This still also might not be the day for you either. You might need to come back to this tomorrow or come back to this later on. And I want to make room for those of us who maybe we do have a strong connection to the fact that our relationships with our fathers was challenging, painful, or has impacted us in the long run. I also want to name, since I'm kind of talking about this like quote unquote other side of it. And again, I mentioned in the last episode around mothering that this is gender expansive. This is beyond the confines of a typical, quote unquote, typical nuclear family unit and what that means biologically, all of those different pieces. I want you to take this and trust that the way that it connects for you is the way that it connects, even if it doesn't look the way that we were taught fathering or parents are supposed to look, depending on their gender. And I want to name that these two topics, I've discussed them separately, but they're so connected because there are ways that you maybe experience fathering because of how you experienced mothering, or the ways that you feel about both parents in your life and the impact, or all the parents, all of the caregiving figures in your life and the impact on it because of how one or two specific caregivers showed up in your life. So I want to also name that you're going to hear a lot of the same things in this episode. And there's a couple of flavors that I think, the same way I named in the last one around mothering, ways that it shows up and it looks a little different when we're talking about the paternal wound because there are expectations around gender when it comes to parenting. So that's kind of why we separated the two. But I do hope that you can recognize that this is so much more messy, so much more nuanced, and so much more complex than it can sometimes be discussed at times. So rock with me as I lay this out. So, when we're thinking about having wounds connected to our experiences with our fathers and fathering, you essentially experienced not getting needs met or experiencing things that were painful or harmful to you. And over time, that left some scars for you, some wounds for you that continue to serve as a blueprint in your relationships today, your relationships with yourself and others. One of the ones that stands out the most, and I think I start with this one often because this is the biggest connection point to the idea of feeling unseen, which is the emotional neglect wound. It can be really evasive because it's not something that you can find on your skin. It's not something that you find in your hospital records, right? Like no one writes this stuff down. It's not as visible. So I don't think it's I actually don't think it's ironic that the emotional neglect wounds are invisible the same way you then become and feel rather invisible. Sometimes you do become invisible. Sometimes that's what ends up happening. And that doesn't mean that you are actually invisible. That was just your experience, and it can then show up later on in life. So this can look like having a parent who was emotionally absent, a parent who expected you to step up a lot. I know this resonates a lot with eldest daughters, first daughters, and only daughters. This can show up for those of us who maybe had hot and cold dads. One time or one day you're happy, you're pleased with me, you're excited. The next day you're not. That can be also an inconsistent parent who was present and then wasn't for long periods of time. I also want to name, and I don't know if I named this well in the other episode, but sometimes we experience needs with parents who did their absolute best, or what they did, how they showed up was not necessarily tied to an obvious neglect of showing up as a parent. So I'm thinking about that. And again, some of this is gendered, right? Because some of what comes up for me when I talk about fathers just doesn't come up when I talk about mothers, but that's a gender thing. Doesn't mean it's different. I thought about the military dad, right? But that was a gendered expectation that the dad is the one who's off at work. That could have been mom too. So I just wanted to name that for those of us who are maybe dancing around our dual experiences with our parents. So dad maybe was in and out because he had to work and provide, but that still doesn't change the fact that that left a painful wound for you. So I want to name and validate that. This can also be a dad who was overinvolved or overbearing, overprotective. That's still a form of emotional neglect because not giving you the space to grow, learn, and experience life can cut you off from developing important skills and an important sense of autonomy. And that's still an emotional need that we have. So not all of our emotional needs are the reassurance, the attention, the love and care. Sometimes it's also like, I trust you to go out there and do something and to fall and get back up. And then I'll be there to help patch up the wounds when that happens. So all of those things can fall under the emotional neglect umbrella. We also then have the controlling and harmful father wound. This can be when you had an experience or forms of abuse, physical, emotional, financial, otherwise, sexual. This could be a general lack of respect of your boundaries that still serves as some form of harm. This can be that the person was hypercritical or emotionally abusive, as I said. And so maybe you never experienced physical pain. Again, this is one of those invisible wounds that people don't always pick up on. But if dad was very critical, very much unpleased all the time, expected a lot out of you, really hard on you, that can still be something that doubled as emotional neglect or abuse. And this also can be something that unfolds when you were not protected from others' harms. So this could be a dad who maybe wasn't present, a dad who maybe was a little more passive. That can be the person sometimes who didn't protect you from other harm. And the last piece that feels important to name is the abandonment father wound. I think culturally, as Black women, this is the one we're the most familiar with. Unfortunately, culturally, it's been a bit of an epidemic, a bit of a chronic and intergenerational wound of Black men being absent. And I think that that's why I wanted to start with the other two, because I think that Black men can be present in their spaces and maybe also not show up. And this is me assuming that we have Black fathers. I think as mixed and multiple racial Black women, your father maybe didn't identify in this way, but because of a lot of the historical impacts on marginalized communities, there has been this ripple effect of the absent father. So I think this one is probably quite familiar. This one is hallmark in leaving a protection and a safety wound, especially because I now likely am experiencing life without. I don't have provision. I don't have support, protection, actual physical safety. Maybe I'm now dealing with a parent, caregiver, or a caregiver system that is strained. Maybe now I am in foster care because of your absence. There is a way, because the patriarchy sets it up, right, where the male in the family is supposed to be the one to make sure everyone's okay. We know that that's not necessarily the case or how it has to be, but that's the way the patriarchy designed for it to be. The absent father can directly tie to feeling like I am now going without and I have to figure out a way to get what I need. And I'm sure you can connect with like how traumatizing that is. This also can leave that very true form abandonment wound, being left in any way, navigating being let down, the inconsistent presence, not just fully absent, but sometimes absent or unpredictably present. It is almost just as harmful for a father, a parent of any kind, but a father to be inconsistently or unpredictably present. I don't know when you'll be here is almost as painful as knowing that you won't. Sometimes, based off of what I've heard with clients, lived experiences, some people would prefer you just completely don't be present because the repeated trauma of disappointment or abandonment when someone goes away and you don't know when or if they'll return is really emotionally harmful. The inability to maintain responsibilities, giving up responsibility, adoption wounds can pop up here. And again, as I named earlier, sometimes passing away. So although that person may or may not have a role in how their life ended, that can still bring up an abandonment wound, and that is completely valid. I think sometimes we forget that our anger, our emotions in general don't always make sense. And I'm using air quotes. That doesn't mean they're not real. The difference is that our emotions are always real, they're always valid. Our interpretations and the behaviors that come out of the emotions are the ones that we get to do some reality testing around. So it is completely okay to experience anger and to have some abandonment experiences related to a parent or a father who passed away. It's okay if we maybe get to tease through what that really means. So when we're looking at someone who maybe had that inconsistent presence or absence in your life, or also dealt with that emotional neglect and all of the above that we already discussed, we can also be left with an abandonment wound. So I know that's really heavy, and it's really important to reflect on like what scars might this experience have left for me when you're thinking about moving forward in life and having challenges in relationships and struggling to feel seen. It could be really helpful to name like, I didn't feel seen by my dad. I didn't feel safe with my dad. I didn't feel saved by my dad. I didn't feel protected or provided for. I didn't have consistency or real intimacy or trust. So it's really important to understand how these wounds show up for you and to acknowledge them. Here are some important things to think about as we talk about how this impacts you. It could be really easy to say, why does it matter? It happened. I'm over it. I'm past it. Or I'll never get over it. And I'm okay with that too, which is okay. Because I'm not of the school of thought of forgiveness is key, not in the way that it's been told to us. And I do believe that it's important and okay to acknowledge old wounds. It's almost crucial to. Just because it's old doesn't mean it doesn't matter anymore. If that were the case, history wouldn't matter. And I think we all see a little more than we wanted to how important history is. This doesn't put the blame all on your dad. This doesn't take your power away by living in the past or holding a grudge. It actually allows you to actually confront the emotions that you didn't have the room, bandwidth, capacity, or knowledge to back in the day as a child, because how could you? And it allows you to create new roots for yourself and understanding because now that you know where these things come from, it helps you take your power back in the situation and choose different behaviors, choose different people, choose different understandings of yourself to live out of. It really brings into perspective how it might be hard in your friendships, in partnerships, difficult as a parent yourself, difficult in the relationship with yourself. So getting more familiar with these paternal, getting more familiar with these paternal and fathering wounds can really help you shift the relational patterns you're facing today that you want to overcome. It also helps you to reclaim the truth of yourself and your needs. Sometimes acknowledging old wounds are really scary because it can make you feel like that means you're going to become vulnerable to your wounds again and that you're going to want the person again or you're going to want the person to fix it again. That's not what this means, right? It might be hard to grieve what you didn't get from dad. It might be challenging to think about yourself as the little girl who was hurt by what they did. And it helps you resolve those wounds so that you can actually be free from needing that person to correct it. and free from trying to just forget about it and actually move into a space where you can get your needs met because you deserve to. And when we get to see ourselves outside of the inner child who didn't get your needs met, then you can start to see yourself as who you really are. You are not just the person who was left and now has to do life alone. You are someone who is deeply loved and wanted by all of life, all of the world, and you can experience safe, consistent love. That's the space that we want to shift from. Not that because you acknowledge that dad left, that you now have to need dad to show up. That's the exact opposite, actually, of what acknowledging past wounds can do for us. And so I really hope that some of what we talk about today lands for you and sets a map toward wholeness for you. Because when I think about wholeness, when I think about healing in general, what happens to us when we're younger serves to sever the wholeness we come here with. There is nothing we need to go get. There is nothing we need to fix, obtain. There is nothing that is really missing. What really happens is that we become burdened by what happened to us, around us, what didn't happen to us, what we didn't get. And then we learn and internalize that there is something missing, that there is something wrong with us, and that there is something to fix. The process of healing is actually noticing that what you need is already there and everything else that you're holding is what you can actually release and let go of. So when we think about feeling seen this summer, to kind of connect it to the big theme of this month, my hope for you would be that in all of the things that we're kind of talking about, the confidence, next week we'll talk about connection. We're talking about trying new things, risk taking, opening ourselves up. We're not talking about going outside and getting something. We're really talking about allowing the parts of us that's already there to just be, to really remove the barriers between who we are and the life we want to live. Now, it's not easy, right? Just because we're talking about dropping things and letting things go and releasing things, that doesn't mean that it's any easier than going to get something. It's just the effort often is placed in the wrong way. We're placing the effort to become more of something rather than to release the thing that has taught us that we're not that thing. So, what are some of those things that we really want to shift, that we want to try to let go of? The experiences with fathers, paternal figures in our life can lead us to believe these imprinted messages that then lead us to these maladaptive or unhelpful coping behaviors. They're really the same as the ones we talked about in the mother wound episode. And I wanted to add a little bit of context about how it shows up with what we think about others as well. So there is the I am not enough wound. Then there's the I am alone wound, or the people will always leave me. People never stay. There's the I cannot get my needs met, or no one can meet my needs. There's the wound around I am not safe, or no one will ever protect me. I think that's a big one here for the reasons I discussed earlier. There's the I have no options or I have no power beliefs. And the one that I think is at the root for the majority of us, the I am not lovable belief. And those beliefs then sprout to these themes of patterns that you probably notice in relationships. These are those direct lines, whether we see it directly or not, from the experiences in early childhood or ongoing relationships with our fathers, too. This isn't necessarily just about what happened back then. Sometimes it's about what's happening right now. And when it's painful, complicated, and inadequate, these messages, they just keep being fed and then they turn into these unhelpful behaviors. One of the themes of patterns that you might notice in relationships that I'm going to talk about is the misplaced needs pattern. And so this is when we really struggle to get our needs met, because often we swing in the direction of fearing having needs and wanting to be hyper independent, never wanting to lean on anyone because then no one can let us down. Or we are trying to get our needs met in the wrong spaces. And I say that on purpose because I wonder if those of us listening might have thought, okay, you either are hyper independent or you're codependent, you're too dependent, you're needy. I purposely didn't use that term because in real life, when you look under the hood, there's no such thing as being needy or too needy, because every need you have is valid. What's not valid is how we often try to get our needs met, or where we try to get our needs met. For example, we might have a need to feel so loved and validated in who we are. It's okay to need that. We just sometimes want one person to offer that need to us all the time. That's what gets coded as needy. I think it is accurate that that's not a healthy way to pursue our needs, but the need itself is okay. It's just that maybe multiple people get to meet that need, including ourselves. We get to be a source of validation, reassurance for ourselves sometimes as well. And the reason why I like to break that down is because if we spend time, which this is what I think we do, if we spend time constantly asking ourselves if our needs are okay and valid, and we go from this is a bad need to this is a good need, or I don't have any needs, or I have all the needs in the world, we're going to continue to have an experience where we just don't get the needs met. All of our needs are valid, but we do get to be mindful about where we get those needs met. And when we grow up, either seeing needs being met incorrectly, inappropriately, we don't see it modeled well, and then also we don't get our needs met, then we don't have a compass for it growing up, or we spend a lot of time developing that compass for what that can look like. And so then we fear relying on others, or we overly rely on others, right? Again, misplaced needs. That's sometimes where the yearning can come in. It's not so much that we're just out here winging it, suffering. It's sometimes that we are either completely denying our own needs, or we're seeking them in places that we truly will not get them met. Right. And I do want to acknowledge that sometimes we do have experiences of unmet needs, even though we are seeking it in the most appropriate of ways. And by and large, we sometimes struggle a lot with like, where do we really go get our needs met? And what are our needs in the first place? We don't even like learn them, because if you grew up not getting your needs met, you are not going to just walk around like, oh, I have a need for support. I have a need for being seen. I have a need for space. You're not going to walk around and own that as willingly if you were taught that you don't get your needs met. So I think that's a big theme here, especially when we're talking about patterns of protection or inconsistency or absence, things that we just kept not getting from a parent, kept not getting from dad. We are going to struggle with then moving forward, especially in people who share that gender. We may not ever make friends with men, let alone struggle in our romantic relationships with men. We may struggle with authority figures who are men, because we just never saw a model that men are safe and consistent. And again, that's why I said this is so much bigger than just your dad, our dad, the paternal figures in our lives, because this is a societal thing that I think we all experience at times, which that's another conversation for another podcast. So I'll leave that there. I also think it can manifest in mistrust wounds. So struggling to trust others or being overly trusting. So the same concept. We might struggle to trust people at all. I'm not even going to believe a thing you say. I'm never going to put myself in a position to be betrayed or let down or harmed. Or we struggle to discern who to trust. Right. So again, this isn't to say, oh, you're just so gullible, you're so naive, because at the end of the day, if someone harms you, it is on the onus of the person who harmed you. That's it. Right. Wrap it up. That's the end of the conversation. And we do get to show up in our experience of safety by having some discernment around who and how to trust. And that radar almost doesn't get developed very well when we were in experiences of harm or inconsistency with our father figures. So this can look like really wanting someone to rely on. So we're willing to overlook the signs that they're not trusting. This can be that we're so hungry and ready to have a space where we can rely on someone that we just skip past it altogether. And it's really hard to tolerate the anxiety of patience and actually getting to know someone enough to decide whether or not they're trustworthy. So again, we can live in the extremes here, and it can really disrupt our ability to build relationships with people who either are trustworthy and we just never give them that chance, or folks who aren't trustworthy, and up to the point where we have power in that, we struggle to show up in that. And the last piece I want to name thematically is the over or under functioning as a learned response, right? Because if we didn't get our needs met, we then have to develop structures and schemas to get those needs met. And oftentimes that shows up in us overfunctioning and maybe taking on too much of the control in order to get our needs met, or underfunctioning and releasing too much of the power. So maybe not too much of the control. We are trying to yield too much of the power to get people to show up for us, or we're not holding enough of our power because we don't really believe it matters anyway. So these are not fixed. These are not singular. They do exist on a spectrum, but I think this is a helpful way to look at it thematically. And similar to what I named in the episode around mothering, and you might be picking up on some of these patterns as responses from, like I said, both parents. So this might be helpful to be continuing to combine for you, but this also might truly feel related to father wounds for you. When you think about the overfunctioning behaviors, we've got that people pleasing. We are over giving, over accommodating, over loving, right? We are going to show up and do as much as we can to get people to not only do what we need them to do, but also to see us a certain way. Because sometimes the need, again, is so emotional. We maybe got all of our physical needs met. No one ever laid a finger on us, but we were never seen. We were never celebrated. No one asked us how we felt. No one cared about what we wanted to talk about. That stuff's real. And you might notice today in your relationships that you feel the same way, that you feel like when you're at the dinner table, everyone gets time to talk and you don't. You might notice in your relationships that everything's about your partner and it's not about you. You might be struggling in your parental life because you feel like all you did was grow up, and then maybe then now it's just time for someone else's life and you just didn't get a chance, right? There could be so many ways that the overfunctioning shows up that's even beyond all of the physical and service oriented ways that we sometimes overfunction. This can be the perfectionism. So when we had the parent who's super critical, hard to please, really hard on us, direct pipeline to overachieving. And this could be a great place to listen to my episode on perfectionism being a relational wound, because I think for so many of us, especially because of how protective perfectionism is, we think it's just about the performance, and it's really about the acceptance. It's really about protecting the relationship. It's about, if I'm good enough, which perfectionism says that good enough is somewhere over there and you must keep striving. If I'm good enough, then you will love me. And that is one of the biggest lies that a wound has ever told us. So I'm hopeful that you all can sit with that. And caretaking. This could be a big one, especially for the absent parent or the person who was not able to provide or protect you. So this feels really big and connected culturally for the father and the paternal figures, because if you had someone who was just not able to show up for you, likely you internalize that it has to be you. And so now you show up in caretaking for others in ways that are then causing you to burn out, in ways for you to ultimately not get your needs met, because we think the more we give, we'll get in return. I think that's mostly like cosmically, that might be true. Like you give and you get back. But when it comes to the actual relational dynamics, we're teaching people that I don't need anything and that I'll do everything. And we sometimes want to substitute for what people didn't do for us, our parents, namely our fathers, and think that that will then allow them to show up for us, when in reality, it actually severs their ability to do so. So it further perpetuates the absence sometimes, not all the times, but sometimes. And so that's something to keep in mind. And then reactivity. So how does reactivity fit under overfunctioning? Sometimes when we're dealing with like our passive fathers, or we're dealing with our absent fathers, or we are dealing with our fathers who ultimately were not able to show up for us, they didn't protect us. So they maybe didn't enact harm, but they just really didn't show up. We can embody a reactive person or a lot of reactive emotions because it serves to fill the void of emotional care, reactions, support, and presence that we didn't get. And so sometimes the high anxiety, the hypersensitivity, the protesting, the reassurance seeking, even anger and being like more domineering, those can be protective for us as a way to supplement what we didn't get. And I hope you hear in some of these things that they're not all bad. I mean, they're not bad, right? They're protective. They just don't work. They ultimately don't help us move toward what we need. So there are bits and pieces of this that's really helpful that we get to keep, but there are other parts of it that are not helpful, that have unintended consequences that we might want to consider. dropping. On the flip side, the underfunctioning behaviors is where we really try to push our needs aside and we work really hard to not need the things that we have, and we show up in that passively. Because the others, we also are still trying to disown our needs, right? If I'm taking care of everybody, I'm kind of saying I don't need anyone to take care of me, and that's not true. So it's still similar, but there's a way we show up in our disowned needs passively. So that's our emotional avoidance. We're shutting down, we're avoiding conflict, we're numbing, and we resist and run from intimacy. Then there is still the people pleasing, but it's on the passive end. So instead of like, I'm going to give all these things, or I'm going to serve you, or I'm going to be superwoman to you, it's the, okay, whatever you want, absorbing whatever people think and believe, taking whatever people put on you, a lot of intense fawning behaviors, and also learned helplessness. Sometimes our reaction to a controlling, manipulative, hypercritical, or overprotective father is kind of just like giving in because that's safer. And this can also show up when we navigate a lot more of the physically, sexually, or emotionally abusive homes. And so it's just easier to give you what you want. And it's easier to, and sometimes how that shows up in the space of the over control on behalf of dad is that they need someone to control. And so sometimes we internalize that as long as we are controllable, as long as we are not fighting back, they will be happy. And so sometimes that's where that can come from. Even if you know that that's not how you feel or that's not what you want, it could just feel safer that way. Procrastination, underperforming. I think of this sometimes as like either it's the intense fear of failure because we were taught, if you're dealing with a hypercritical dad, anything you do is wrong. And so we just don't ever want to be wrong. So we just don't try. Or sometimes this is a form of protesting where if there was so much put on me or there was so many expectations or the bar was so high that I now choose just not to. And that's my way of maintaining control instead of you controlling me. And in addition to the learned helplessness, there can also be this learned powerlessness. And so the last three I named, they're all kind of similar. We defer responsibility, we refuse to be responsible, and we are then risking the blame, shame, and failure. But if I never take it on, I don't ever have to take ownership over what happened to me because it just feels easier to avoid it altogether. So if anything, we can think about this as the avoidance side and the other as the anxious side, which is why attachment lays and maps over this so well. I don't know about you, but when I think about all these things, it brings up a lot in me because it can bring up a lot of shame when you think about, oh, is that how I've been showing up? Is that what's going on with me? Is that why? Or I already know this and it's painful and I want to change, but it's hard. The biggest piece to remember here is that once you shed light on all these things, shame doesn't help. Compassion does. You didn't wake up one day and say, I am going to give all of myself to everyone so that they love me. What you did is, I'm in a space where people have already shown me that they are not going to give what I need. They are not showing me that they care. They are not showing me that they are attuned. And I need to get my needs met in order to survive. So I need to do something. And one way or the other, any list of the behaviors I just named seemed like the best option. And it's also really helpful. And this is why inner child work is so powerful, because when you think of yourself as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, right? You're not going to think, as a 7-year-old, you should have set boundaries, right? You're thinking, as a 7-year-old, all you did know was to just become passive, to become a people pleaser, to strive for perfectionism. That's all you knew. That was the easiest that your little brain, little meaning age-wise, not our brains being small, but that's all you had at the time. You needed that. That's why it can be so powerful if you've ever worked with a therapist who does in paternal family systems, or IFS, if you're familiar with that, the acronym for it. It's so powerful when they take you through the phase of thinking your protective parts, because it can be really hard to think your anxiously attached self. It can be hard to think the part of you that like really worked hard to keep a man around, right? Who really worked hard to keep your partner from leaving, who really just refused to be consistent in a dream. Why would I think that part, right? But that part learned a long time ago that this is the easiest way to be safe. Now we have new information. And so you get to say, you know what? I did the best I could with what I had, with what I knew at the time. I get to thank myself for trying to keep myself safe. And I get to show up for myself today in choosing a different way. And that's what Black Girl Scene is all about, is knowing that when we grew up in one way or the other feeling invisible, because all of those patterns then end up leaving you feeling so unseen. When you work so hard, even if you are literally the one everyone calls, something about that is so lonely. Something about that makes you feel invisible. Even if you are working in a highly visible role, something about the pressure makes you feel so alone. Even if you think you like to kind of hide under the radar, something about that feels so masking and so inauthentic for you. And these behaviors, although they were protective at one point in your life, you realize now that you don't need them anymore, that you want to let go of them, and that you do want to feel like you matter. You want to feel like your needs can be met. You want to feel autonomous. You want to feel in control of your life, and you want to feel good about you. That is what being seen is all about. So with that being said, here's some questions I want to leave you with, that I want to wrap you up in a loving blanket with, to ask and connect with yourself. Like, as you continue to heal from the wounds left behind from your experiences with your father, you get to ask yourself these questions, and you get to help get started on unfolding in a new direction, pivoting, turning the tides in your life so that it doesn't feel like you're just repeating the blueprints that were given to you, that you're writing a new script. All right. So one of the first questions, what rules did you learn to live by that you can let go of now? Next one, what did you learn about yourself that no longer fits, that is no longer needed for survival? Sometimes learning that you're not good enough, that was protective, because if you didn't believe you were good enough, you wouldn't try these other behaviors, the boundaries, the asserting of your needs that kept getting unmet when you were too young to stand up for yourself. Maybe you don't have to believe that anymore. Maybe you get to do the healing work to believe something different, to believe the truth, which is that you are worthy. And the last question, how can you hold compassion for yourself instead of shame? How can you hold compassion for your dad without neglecting compassion for yourself? How can we place the compassion here instead of the shaming and the blaming? And compassion does not mean forgiveness, but for those of us who maybe struggle to hold our wounds and to sit with them because it just feels hard to fully feel the not so pleasant emotions toward our parent, it's important to know that you can feel that compassion without neglecting what you need to say and hold for yourself. So I ended this the same way last time, which was to write the whole story, going back to these wounds, as painful as it can be. And I want to invite you to do that with a licensed care professional if you need that, and to continue to build community to support you in that. Right. But when you go back there, it's not because you want to stay there, and it's not because you want to be defined by what happened to you. It's because you want all the information to write the full story. That's how you start writing the next chapter. That's how you move forward. That's how you heal. So thank you for listening today. If you like this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and rate the podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to the Scene Sunday newsletter, where I write a little bit more about the episode, and I always let you know when the next one drops. Share the love, save this one, and come back to this when you need a reminder and a good hug. And to the Black girl who is allowing herself to own how the fathering you did or didn't receive impacted you, I see you. I wish you the spaces to unpack this safely and lean into the story of you that heals. Take care. Thanks for tuning in to the Black Girl Scene podcast. This podcast is meant for information purposes only and is not meant to substitute for medical advice. Although I'm a licensed therapist, this podcast does not establish a clinical relationship with you, the listener, nor does it replace a relationship with a licensed mental health professional. For more information and resources on finding a therapist or support, please visit www.blackgirlscene.com/support.